All right, Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Qala tabaraka wa ta'ala fi kitabihi al-kareem ba'ad an aqul a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. ألف لام ميم أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا وليعلمن الكاذبين أم حسب الذين يعملون السيئات أن يسبقونا ساء ما يحكمون صدق الله العظيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما اللهم أرنا حقيقة الأشياء كما هي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه آمين يا رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So this is the 12th day of Ramadan Conversations. We continue within the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam right around the middle 4 years. So a lot of the scholars, in terms of placing where the revelation or the Meccan revelations, the part of the Meccan Quran was revealed in which time period. So they say that it's the first 4 years, the middle 4 years, and the last 4 years, or the third set of 4 years. And that's how they place a lot of surahs. This particular surah that I recited from, and we're going to study the first ruku of, which is Surah Al-Ankabut. The idea is that this is right around the cusp of the middle 4 years and the last 4 years. It's right around that central time period in Mecca. And what was characteristic of this time period was the physical torture that the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, the companions of the Prophet, what they were subjected to was at its peak. So when whatever they had in terms of accusations against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not work. By did not work, I mean it did not deter the messenger and his handful of companions. Even though the number of people who had accepted Islam remained small, so in that sense, their calumny, their accusations, their propaganda, whatever you want to call it, it did work in that it wasn't allowing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be taken as seriously as he would have wanted, to get an audience for people to hear him out. That didn't happen. Nevertheless, those who did accept, as few as they were, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, they held strong. They kept going. Not because it did not hurt them, not because it did not bother them, but because they were willing to take on that hurt. They were willing to face that pain because of their commitment to what they believed in. And this was frustrating the people of Quraysh even more. What Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is calling people towards is different, drastically different from the polytheism that is rampant, from the understanding of society, of human beings, their position, their status, everything. And so it's incredibly irksome for them. They want it to end more than anything else. They want things to go back to normal, quote unquote, that unjust, evil, normal, whatever it was. They want that status quo to come back. Now, its status quo is still there, only Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's voice is irritating. It's saying that it should not be this way. Them standing strong, continuing The ayat of Quran are continuously coming. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam continues to teach the companions. They're spreading it, they're talking about it as much as they can, as much as they can allow, or they're allowed to. The Quraysh, they scale their efforts to deter Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions even more. They scale them up. They increase the atrocities, the oppression. So you can take the verbal abuse. Let's see if you can take the physical abuse. So right around this point, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, mostly the companions who were slaves, who had responded to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because for the slaves, for the very first time, a message was presented to them, a belief system was presented to them that valued them as human beings, something that they were not accustomed to. And it made sense because whatever they saw of themselves as human beings was finally getting some validation, some appreciation, it was being sanctioned, as opposed to whatever they were subjected to before, which a lot of them had resigned themselves to. But this value of their own life in relationship to the one God was so powerful that commitment to this, not just for their own selves, but for others like them, they were willing to bear any and all sorts of torture for it. And so we've all heard the stories, we've all read what they went through. Every single one of us. We've heard Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu being tortured by Umayyah, deprived of food, deprived of water, tied up to rocks in the desert, in the scorching desert sun, being made to lay barebacked without much clothes on the scorching desert sand with a huge boulder on his back, and all the time being whipped, being beaten up. And with every whipping, a demand was placed in front of him: quit Islam, denounce Islam, get away from, say something bad about Muhammad. Consistently. Physical pain as much as Umayyah could manage. And not just Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, so many others. Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, rather than saying what Umayyah wanted him to say, continued to say, Ahadun Ahad. Allah is one. And they actually asked him later, why did you choose that word? He's like, because it irritated him the most. And so he continued to say, Ahadun Ahad. The more I said it, the more he punished me, the more he tortured me. And so I chose to say this again and again and again. Those of you who've seen the Umar series would see how this particular depiction in there, it is actually very brilliantly portrayed as to how the one being tortured but saying Ahadun Ahad is more free, more liberated than the chief of his tribe, the affluent person with authority who is forcing him to, or trying to force him to recant. The chief looks more imprisoned, more in his frustration, and the slave looks more liberated, although he's being tortured. Others, women slaves, they were beaten Umar ibn al-Khattab, prior to accepting Islam, of course, he was one of the people torturing the Muslim slaves. He would torture them so much that one of the slave girls he would torture, he'd say, I'm stopping not because I feel sorry for you, but because I'm tired. I'm tired of beating you. Imagine that poor soul, that woman, that girl, how much she has gone through. One of the earlier couples who accepted Islam, Yasir and Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, and their son was Ammar bin Yasir. Although they had been freed of slavery, but even the status of a freed slave in the Arab society was not really free. Abu Jahl had his sway over them. And so he started torturing them. He tortured them repeatedly, incessantly, in public. He would strip them of their clothes in front of people watching, both husband and wife, and beat them and torture them, demanding of them to just acknowledge some level of divinity in the idols, something. They refused. So for Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha, he took a spear and he speared her through her pelvis with people watching, with her own son watching. With Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he had him tortured, tried to force him to recant, he wouldn't. And so he had him tied up with 4 different animals, 4 different ropes, 4 different limbs, and he had them run in 4 different directions so that he's literally torn to shreds. And that's how they became the first martyrs in Islam. Yasir and Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. Their son Ammar, having witnessed all of this, also being tortured, could not bear it anymore and actually said what Abu Jahl wanted him to say. And then he became incredibly remorseful and came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, I didn't want to say it, but it was just too difficult for me. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, it's okay. Do not worry about it. You said it, you were forced to say it. It doesn't count. So reassuring him, again, this is a person who's seen his parents die and he could not bear the torture himself. So then there was Khabbab bin al-Ard radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He was one of those tortured the most. And it is important, I've repeated these narrations multiple times myself. A lot of you have heard it. But it remains important to reiterate this before ourselves for how we are so prone to forgetting. Because we owe these people. The world owes them for so much of what we take for granted. And the Sahaba used to repeat it among themselves. In better days, in more affluent days, they would remember those days in Mecca. And they would talk about what went on. And they would say to each other, okay, what did you go through? What did you go through? With Khabbab, they would ask, and he wouldn't tell them what happened. He would just lift his shirt. And they would see that his back was filled with holes. And those holes were burning pieces of coal that he was made to lay down on without his shirt. And a huge rock was kept on his chest, so he couldn't get up or try to run away. And those pieces of coal would pierce through his skin. It was him who came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, don't you ask Allah to help us? When is the help of Allah coming? Mata Nasrullah. When is the help of Allah coming? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say, you need to hang on. It's too early to be asking that question. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go to be deserving of that help. Paraphrasing, of course, but something to that effect. And it is at this point, of course, Rasulullah himself is watching all of this torture. It's torturing him. He himself is subjected to torture. On 2 occasions at least, or once he's in sajda, Abu Jahl winds his rope, his cloak in the form of a rope, and strangulates to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the point of his eyes bobbling out. Doesn't kill him, but nearly so. On another occasion, he dares one of his cronies that there was a sacrifice of a camel at a distance. Who's going to bring the remains of that camel and thrust them upon him? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in sajda, and in that sajda, he's attacked to the point that it's obviously too heavy for him to get out from underneath it. And there is nobody there who would dare to remove it from his body to help him out of it, and he's suffocating underneath. And it was Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha who runs to the aid of her father, and she's a young girl at that point. So it is all of these things that are going on. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is asked by other Sahaba too. And so the surah is revealed at that point. Alif Lam Mim. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do people think that they would be left on saying we believe and they will not be tested? They are saying that they believe. But since when did human beings start thinking that they're so uncomplicated, so straightforward, that who they say is who they are? What they say is what they actually believe. Since when did human beings start deluding themselves such? If you're making a claim, words that issue from your tongues, they have a bearing. Words have their own rights. And if those words happen to be words of Iman that you're professing in Allah, coming from a society that has pretty much rebelled against Allah in anything that relates with Tawheed. So there is going to be a test. And it's important to know that this word fitna is, let's just say that a test is a very inadequate translation of it. One of the implications of this word is the process of purification for gold. Gold, it is found in its ore as mixed up with all that is not gold, all that is impure, all that is not as valuable. And for it to be purified of those impurities, of the rest of its ore, it has to be heated. so it can be melted and siphoned off. That is the word fitna. It is used for gold. So the words that we say, they're important. They are who we want to be. And these experiences of living up to those claims, of living up to those words, is becoming who we want to be, who we claim to be. The claim is not a declaration of where we are. It's not of being human. It is of becoming human. So the claim to believe is, it says I believe, but it aspires to believe. It is the process of believing, becoming a believer. And in that becoming of a believer, these purifications are necessary. Practically living it is necessary. And we will talk about in Surah Al-Baqarah as to how precisely because of the sacrifices of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, the process of purification, so that whatever gold we hold inside of ourselves, the gold that we claim to be, it isn't as physically demanding for it to be drawn out, at least not anymore. And we'll talk about why that is. But nevertheless, there is demands. Some of them are physical, not to the level of torture, but nevertheless, those demands are there. Claims are to be tested. We can't take our claims for granted. We can't assume ourselves to be so pure already. I'm already pure gold. That is the greatest delusion that we can be suffering from. We have a lot of evil tendencies. We have a lot of inadequacies, which are fetters, which are holding back from so much of that goodness that is also there from coming out. And it is these practical experiences of living up to our claims that we get an opportunity to be purified. It's at every sight of suffering, at every possibility of difficulty, of a struggle, if we shy away, then what we're depriving ourselves of are opportunities of actually growing to the greatness that we hold inside of ourselves. And if we justify our laziness by our narcissism that we're already there, we're already so great, then all of what that suffering becomes is a victimizing, and then we end up victimizing ourselves. To go through that suffering with a nobility, with hope of growing. Despair is suffering minus meaning. And this understanding is to inspire a recognition of that meaning, so that suffering is more bearable. It's less insufferable. The psychological challenges will accompany that. And part of those psychological challenges will include, why me? I don't want to bear through this anymore. I don't feel like there is any hope left. That is going to be a natural part of those challenges. But to hang on for dear life, for dear faith, even in the midst of that, even in the face of that, to continue standing, however much our legs wobble, reminding ourselves and taking other people's help to remind ourselves of that meaning, of that faith. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. So Allah says we definitely tested those before them. Rasulullah ﷺ told Khabbab that people before you, they were sawed in half. They were buried in sand neck deep and sawed in half. They've gone through worse. There's people who have gone through worse than you. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّا الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهَ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا. So Allah will find out those who are really truthful. وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. And He will find out those of you who are liars. You're making a claim. The future is an open possibility. Maybe you're telling the truth, maybe you're not. Allah will find out. Allah will find out. He's not a puppeteer. He's not written the script to the end. And that's just, it's going to play out the way it's written out. No. You have choices to make. And your active decisions, especially those in the midst of suffering, they're determining that end. They're influencing what the end is going to be like. Your choices have a lot of power in your story. وَلَا يَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ أَمْ حَسِبَ الَّذِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ السَّيِّئَاتِ أَنْ يَسْبِقُونَ. And to those who think who practice all of this evil, all this torture, do they think they'll get the better of us? سَاءَ مَا يَحْكُمُونَ. What a ridiculous judgment. How evil is their judgment, if that's what they've concluded. مَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ. Those who hope to meet, the one who hopes to meet Allah. فَإِنَّ أَجَلَ اللَّهِ لَآتٍ. And you should know that Allah's appointed time is definitely going to come. Because in the midst of that suffering, that's exactly what you're feeling. Hopeless. It's not going to come. But a feeling of hopelessness does not have to equal to despair. And it is because of that feeling of hopelessness that no, it's not going to come, that the reminder that it is going to come becomes necessary. It has some value. So judging people for feeling hopeless or feeling like it's uncalled for. That is why the reminder is of necessity. That is why the statement is being made. It is a meaningful statement. It is meaningful precisely because the person feels hopeless. فَإِنَّ أَجَلَ اللَّهِ لَآتٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. And He is all hearing, all knowing. He's with you in that suffering. وَمَنْ جَاهَدَ فَإِنَّمَا يُجَاهِدُ لِنَفْسِهِ. And whoever struggles is struggling for his own self. The struggle is for your own enhancement, for your own growth. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَغَنِيٌّ عَنِ الْعَالَمِينَ. For definitely Allah is independent of alameen. Allah is ghani, and so much of your struggles are elevating you towards this istighna, this power and independence. The more you struggle, the stronger you get, the closer you get to Allah and to Allah's attributes. But it is important to journey the journey. You can't just jump to the end. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَنُكَفِّرَنَّ عَنْهُمْ سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ. And for those who believed and performed righteously, we will definitely blot out their sins from them. Those sins that are holding you back from attaining to those attributes, from becoming that gold. And what's that gold? That gold is embodying yourselves with the attributes of Allah. وَلَنَجْزِيَنَّهُمْ أَحْسَنَ الَّذِي كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. And without a doubt, we will reward them for the best of what they did. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.